ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be another long share. You know, a lot of us realize how deeply rooted policing is to slavery because, that's originally your slave catchers. But another aspect of what came out of slavery is the prison system. This is when you went from being a slave to being a criminal. And this is where it all started. When they call you a criminal, ladies and gentlemen, that's passed down bullshit that comes straight out of slavery. And it pretty much identified those white people that were deeply rooted in slavery when they open their mouth and say that. And this is why I'm saying this. After the Civil War, the South was completely destroyed. And when the slaves left the plantations, the South economically collapsed. They literally could not get back on their feet, ladies and gentlemen, until it was the North that poured all kinds of money into the South to help them rebuild. Many of the plantation owners pre-Civil War lost their plantations to bankruptcy and foreclosure. Many of them could not do that work. I mean, let's face it, even with sunscreen on, white people burn up. This was a time when there was no sunscreen on the shelf. These people couldn't work from sun up to sundown. They would have been burnt up with all kinds of pus balls all over their bodies, skin cancer, and they would have eventually died. This is why they needed the melanated black man, woman, and child to do that work. They weren't strong enough physically and don't have the right attributes to be out in the sun without sunscreen. Let's face it, it's the truth. Jail came right after slavery. It was a crafty way for them to mastermind ways to get the black man back into his form of servitude. In prison, they could no longer call it slave, so they went to calling it a prisoner. But a prisoner is a slave and a slave is a prisoner. It's really the same thing. Now, there are some that will argue and tell you it's different. It's not. Because, see, we know this because right after slavery, that's when the prisons exploded in the country. Because, see, they never had no intentions of really, truly letting you go. So the people that get angry because someone may say, slavery, the slave catcher was your police officer of today. It's the truth. I don't know what you're getting upset about. Just like the prison has replaced the plantation. It's the damn truth. And if it's not true, then prove it to me. But I have all of the documentation that says it is true. So that's when black people became criminals. So any white person that keeps insisting that you are a criminal, he more than likely his family was deeply rooted in slavery because that's where it came from. That's exactly where they don't realize when they say that to black people, we can identify the one that came from families that were deeply rooted in slavery. Now, you can say that you weren't, but it's no coincidence that you keep saying that, and it comes directly after slavery, from slave to criminal. Woo, you ain't fooling us. What can I say? You're just not. Rooted in slavery, prison labor, exploitation. The United States has once again surpassed its own world record for incarcerating the highest percentage of its population, according to a report released by the Bureau of Prison Statistics. 1 out of every 32 adults was in prison, in jail, on probation, or on parole at the end of 2005. But the crisis of mass incarceration is not felt evenly in the United States. Race defines every aspect of the criminal justice system, from police targeting to crimes charged and rates of conviction. African American men between the ages of 20 and 39 account for nearly 1/3 of all sentenced prisoners. Now, I had heard from a cop. This came from an actual cop. And he said the main targets are African American men between 16 and 24. That's what they target out here, 16 to 24 years old. Those are the ones they want in prison and to use as their prison labor. And as you can see in these pictures, you see just a chain gang of African American men. And you can also see, usually probably far down in the background, are the white men that were out there just standing around doing nothing as usual. Over the last 3 decades, the explosion of prison population in the United States paralleled the stagnation in the global economy. In the early 1970s, the United States and the G7 nations began implementing neoliberal policies, moving production from the North to the global South, pushing entire sectors of workers in the United States out of the economy. As the economic role of working class in the United States shift from manufacturing to staffing to a rising industry, African American workers face staggering rates of unemployment. And ladies and gentlemen, that was a big reason why many of them were in jail. You didn't commit no crime. See, these are all things they made up. What they did was, when they came up with their black codes, slave laws, pig laws, they literally made it illegal for you to be black in America. Just you being a black person makes you a criminal. Now, what did they do? They would ask you to show your papers. If you didn't show your papers, you were a criminal. You went to jail. If you did not have a job, that was considered criminal. You went to jail. See, if you were a real criminal, they wouldn't have to make stuff up like that. The fact that they had to make up those kind of things just to get you in jail, that tells me you're not a criminal at all. Okay? What makes you a criminal are just garbage they made up. And go and read some of the slave codes and black codes they had wrote. They are so stupid. It ain't even funny. Dumb. If you didn't cross the street when a white person was coming in the opposite direction, that was a crime. If you talked out loud in public, that was a crime. If you laughed out loud in public, that was a crime. You know, these people are silly, and they're still silly. You know, this is the reason why many caucasoids walk around and believe they can put you in jail for anything. And that's why they always talking like that to black people. Because you got to understand, that is passed down behavior, and it all stems back to slavery. Oh, I'll call the police, put you in jail. You won't go to jail. You know, that's how they talk to us. And just understand, they've been talking to black people like that for centuries. This just didn't start overnight. It may surprise some people that as the number of people without jobs increased, the number of working people actually increases. They become prison laborers. So you went from being on the plantation to being snatched up for stupid stuff and put back into labor. They had to do that. You know why? Because they can't live without your labor. See, when the slaves left the plantation, just remember this, economically, all of those slave owners collapsed. They no longer had that free labor to rely on. Now, if these people were sufficient and could do for themselves, they wouldn't have to do stuff like this. But the fact that they depend heavily on the Black labor, they had to come up with stupid remedial ways to get you in prison, to get that labor again, that cheap labor or that free labor, because they can't live without it. And America still heavily depends on it. This is why they mass incarcerate more than any other country in the world. That tells you right there, they still heavily depend on the labor they get out of Black men. If that's not the case, then prove that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Because America has not proven it over all of these centuries. They still haven't proven that they can stand on their own 2 feet without subjugating a group of people. They can't do it. They have no history of doing it. Not 1 ounce of history. Don't come in, my grandfather. I don't want to hear all that stuff, okay? The bottom line is, as long as you keep mass incarcerating people and not proving that you can stand on your own 2 feet without doing that, then everything you're saying is in vain. Don't add up to a hill of beans. But America can't prove that. You can't. This is why you got an attorney general that is itching to mass incarcerate Black men over some damn marijuana, because you can't live without the Black labor. You have no history of living without it. There are currently over 70 factories in California, 33 prisons alone. Prisoners do everything from textile work and construction to manufacturing and service work. Again, America heavily depends on Black labor. They can't run this country without it. They can't do it without you. Prisoners make shoes, clothing, detergent. They do dental lab work, recycling, metal production, and wood production. They operate dairy, farms, and slaughterhouses. America cannot live without being on the backs of Black people. They couldn't do it centuries ago. They can't do it now. They have no record of standing on their own without subjugating the Black population, because they can't do it. United States prisons mirror free enterprise zone in Africa, Asia, and Latin American countries. The prison is a reflection of the third world within the United States. Prisoners are not protected by minimum wage laws or overtime. Again, free, cheap labor. That's what your body is. They don't care if you didn't commit the crime. They need to stack the bodies in there so that this work can get done. Corporations don't want to hire workers. They want slaves. If they took these jobs out to prisons and just gave it to people on the outside that needed jobs and paid them a decent wage, they don't want to do that. Your elite wants slaves. This is why the Black man is being snatched off the street over any little petty thing and thrown into prison. The same people they enslaved are the same ones they mass incarcerate today. It's not a coincidence. Let's go on. And are explicitly barred from the right to organize and collectively bargain. So they can't have a union, they can't get paid minimum wage, they can't get paid for their overtime. They virtually have every right stripped from them. Now, I know many of you like to repeat the same thing. Well, if you don't do the crime, you will do it. Well, everybody in jail didn't do the crime. This is why America have to release innocent people every single year, because America don't give a shit if you're innocent and they put you in jail. This is why you don't fight to get them out. Just get the bodies in there so the work can get done. That's all you're concerned about. In fact, the conditions for the overwhelmingly Black and Latino men and women inside the United States prison system are so familiar that of workers in manufacturing and sweatshops of the global South, that in 1995, Oregon politicians were even courting Nike to move their productions from Indonesia to Oregon's prison. We propose that Nike take a look at their transportation costs and their labor costs. Oregon State Representative Kevin Mannix explained in an interview with researcher Reese Ehrlich. We could offer competitive prison inmate labor in Oregon. So they're bargaining and trying to get you to work for these corporations. And see, the more corporations they add, the more they need to mass incarcerate. Just understand that. See, that's why Obama was trying to do away with these private prisons, because he knew what they were. But Jeff Sessions and Trump want them back because, these are the people that donated to their campaign. So as the more corporations jump on board, they're going to have to snatch more Black bodies off the street to put in there to do the work. See, your cop is still your slave catcher, and your prison, that is your new plantation. Rooted in slavery, to understand the conditions that have allowed such an exploitative industry to develop, we have to look at the origins of the United States prison system itself. Before the abolition of slavery, there was no real prison system in the United States. Okay, so remember, before slavery was abolished, there were no real prison systems in the United States. Listen, punishment for crime consists of physical torture, which they still do today, referred to as corporal or capital punishment, which they still do today, while the model prison in the United States was built in Auburn, New York in 1817. It wasn't until the end of the Civil War, with the official abolition of slavery, that the prison system took hold. Now, look at the timing. Look at the timing between the time when slavery ended and the prison system began. See, it's no coincidence that it happened that way, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a coincidence. They never wanted to let you go. When they lost Black people from the plantation, they had to mastermind a new way to get you back in to do the labor all over again. And prison was their key to keeping you as their meal ticket all these centuries, because we're nothing but their meal ticket. If they could have lived without slavery, they could have proved it in all these centuries, and they haven't done it. They have failed to do it. In 1865, the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery for all people except those convicted of a crime and opened the doors for mass criminalization. See, if they really wanted to let you go, nothing like that would have ever been put in their Constitution. They would have just let you go. But the fact that they put something like that in the Constitution should clearly tell you they had no intentions of letting Black people go. 1865. That was around the same time Black people left those plantations. All of a sudden, here comes the 13th Amendment, and here comes the prisons being built all over the place. And who do they mass incarcerate? Black people. Not a coincidence. Prisons were built in the South as part of the backlash to Black Reconstruction and as a mechanism to re-enslave Black workers. Let me read that again. I'm going to read it again. I don't care if you don't like it. Prisons were built in the South as part of the backlash to Black Reconstruction and as a mechanism to re-enslave Black workers. In the late 19th century South, an extensive prison system was developed in the interest of maintaining the racial and economic relationship of slavery. They never wanted slavery to go away. Louisiana famous Angola prison illustrates this history best. In 1880, this 8,000-acre family plantation was purchased by the state of Louisiana and converted into a prison. Slave quarters became cell units. Now expanded to 18,000 acres, the Angola plantation is tilted by prisoners working the land. Now, what's the difference between that and slavery? Absolutely nothing. A chilling picture of modern-day chattel slavery. That's all it is. That's the truth. Black codes and convict leasing. When slavery was legally abolished, a new set of laws called the Black Codes emerged to criminalize legal activity for African Americans. Through the enforcement of these laws, acts such as standing in one area of town or walking at night, for example, became the criminal acts of loitering or breaking curfew for which African Americans were imprisoned. Now, if you were the most violent, let me ask you, I'm going to keep raising this. If you were the most violent, then why would they have to make this kind of stuff up? The fact that they had to make up all these little petty laws and put them into the Black Code tells me you weren't much of a criminal. Because if you really were, we would hear about this major crime you committed and ended up in jail. But these are the things we hear about: loitering, vagrancy, breaking curfew. Well, that's petty shit. If that's the case, you would have to round up all of America. You weren't no damn criminal. Look at what they had to make up to get you in there. Look at the length they went to get you in there. It's amazing they didn't say if you're outside breathing oxygen, you got taken into prison. Some petty ass motherfuckers. As a result of Black codes, the percentage of African Americans in prison grew exponentially, surpassing whites for the first time. A system of convict leasing was developed to allow white slave plantation owners in the South to literally purchase prisoners to live on their property and work under their control. Now, what's the difference between that and slavery? It's the same damn thing. Like I said, they just slapped a different label on it. Now it's prison. But when you look at the work they do and the work slaves did, there's absolutely no distinction. They're exactly the same. Through this system, bidders paid an average of $25,000 a year to the state in exchange for control over the lives of all the prisoners. So they bid it on and bought prisoners. So what's the difference between them bidding on and getting a slave and bidding on and getting prisoners? What's the distinction? It's exactly the same. See, this is why I'm telling you, all they did was come up with a crafty way to keep Black men primarily in slavery. That's all they did. The system provided revenue for the states and profits for plantation owners. In 1878, Georgia leased out 1,239 prisoners, but 115 were African Americans. All but 115 were African Americans. Much like the system of slavery, damn right it is, from which it emerged, convict leasing was a violent and abusive system. The death rate of prisoners leased to railroad companies between 1877 and 1879 was 16% in Mississippi, 25% in Arkansas, and 45% in South Carolina. The stories of violence and torture eventually led to massive reform and abolition movements involving allegiance between prisoner organization, labor unions, and community groups. By 1930s, every state had abolished convict leasing. So really, that really wasn't that long ago. It really wasn't that long ago. Unbelievable. And they got the nerve to look at you today talking about nobody's a slave. Chain gangs. As the southern states began to phase out convict leasing, see, this is what I'm saying. They phase one thing out, but bring in something else that's exactly what they phased out. That resembles exactly what they phased out. These people are full of shit. Prisoners were increasingly made to work in the most brutal form of forced labor, the chain gang. The chain gangs originated as a part of a massive road development project in the 1890s. Georgia was the first state to begin using chain gangs to work male felony convicts outside of the prison walls. Chains were wrapped around the ankles of the prisoners, shackled 5 together while they worked, ate, and slept. Following Georgia's example, the use of chain gangs spread rapidly throughout the South. Oh, really? Oh, I'm so shocked. I'm shocked. Oh, man, these people are devils. For 30 years, African American prisoners and some white prisoners in the chain gangs were worked at gunpoint, under whips and chains, in a public spectacle of chattel slavery and torture. That's exactly what it is. What's the difference between being chained up as a slave and chained up in a chain gang? That's what I'm saying. They do the same exact thing, but then slap a different label on it to make it look like it's something different. It's the same damn thing. It's chattel slavery. Eventually, the brutally and violent associated with chain gangs labor in the United States gained worldwide attention. The chain gang was abolished in every state by the 1950s, almost 100 years after the end of the Civil War. Prison labor exploitation in the 21st century. Just a few decades later, we were witnessing we are witnessing the return of all of these systems of prison labor exploitation. Private corporations are able to lease factories in prisons, as well as lease prisoners out to their factories. I saw one of those buses on the road, with prisoners in it. And it didn't dawn on me that they were probably taking them to a factory to go work. Okay. Private corporations are running prisons for profit. So slaves for profit, just like it's always been in America. Government run prison factories operate a multi-billion-dollar industry in every state. This is why you're being mass incarcerated. They need you. They need your black body in every state. Devils, man. And throughout the federal prison system. And most punitive and racist prison systems, we are even witnessing the return of the chain gang. The chain gang is coming back, ladies and gentlemen. Prisoner resistance and community organization has been able to defeat some of these initiatives. Resistance and I'm sorry, but in Arizona, Maricopa County continues to operate the first women's chain gang in the history of the U.S. So now they're doing women like that? Oh my God. Woo, the devil got plenty of bags of tricks. Shifts in the United States economy and growth crisis of underemployment and poverty in communities of color have created the conditions for the current wave of mass incarceration and the boom in prison labor exploitation. In the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood of San Francisco, a historically Black community, with an estimated 50% unemployment rate, the community is facing criminalization, incarceration, and mass displacement as a result of gentrification. San Francisco, along with 8 other counties in California, is implementing gang injunctions, curfews, anti-loitering, and anti-association laws that function very much similar to Black codes for Black, Latino, and Asian youth, using the pretext of gang prevention to track young men into the prison system to become prison labor while preparing for community redevelopment and gentrification. So, as I stated before, you see, they're enforcing things that were similar to Black codes. Again, it's illegal for you to be Black. Just your color makes it illegal, makes you a criminal. So they're trying to find ways to keep the Black codes alive. Well, they're already doing that. I'll take that back. They're already doing it. People organized to win employment rights power is building power among Bayview residents in fighting for economic development that addresses the interests of the Black community, which will create alternatives to prison labor exploitation. The fight against the exploitation of prison labor is at once a fight against racial profiling and mass incarceration, and also for genuine economic development in Black, Latino, and Asian and Pacific Island communities. The labor movement in the United States has a responsibility to support prisoner unions, such as Missouri Prison, a labor union which is fighting for higher wages and collective bargaining, and to challenge labor unions to dismiss prisoners as stealing jobs from the good law-abiding workers on the outside. As Sidney Williams of the MLPU states, in this struggle, we seek to regain our human dignity. That is the demand of the slavery abolition movement of the 21st century. America is heavily dependent on the mass incarceration and the enslavement of Black people for centuries. If this country could live without your labor, then they should have proved it a long time ago. And they are failing on all levels in proving it. We fuel the American economy, and they know it. Now, you notice they do all this talk about you going back to Africa. If they really wanted us out of here, they could have gotten us out of here centuries ago. Why are they still hanging on to the Black population? I'll tell you why. Because they can't live without Black people being here and doing the labor in the prisons. That's why they have to mass incarcerate you. It's not a coincidence. The same people that were out on those plantations are the same ones they're mass incarcerated. America can't live without your Black labor. Again, if America can't live without your Black labor, then let them prove that they have lived without it all throughout the centuries. They can't do it. They can't do it. Now you see, and perhaps you'll understand why Black people in this country will never get a fair shake in the courts. They don't want you to have anything fair. They don't want the playing field to be leveled. They don't want any cop being fair to you. They don't want the courts to be fair to you. They like having that advantage over you. They like it. But it's not a natural advantage. It's artificial. It's shit they had to make up to put themselves at the top. It's not a natural advantage. There's a reason why the same group of people that did this to us can no longer reproduce. May their numbers continue to fall rapidly. My Abba, please step up the pace on them. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to my channel, please do. And if you can make a donation to my hurricane fund, please do, ladies and gentlemen. Peace.